All right. I think I'm ready for, ladies and gentlemen, Life of Pi. I think, as many of you might have read, many people have never known that pie is my spirit animal. Pie has been a big part of my life. Let me start way back with my Gramps. He owned two bakeries that cranked out pies for wholesale and resale. They were doing mostly grocery stores, and then they even did some for local air bases around the area, right? You can kind of check it out. Here's the crew. I use this in my advertisements, okay? You can't see it, but they're all wearing super long aprons. All of those aprons, or many of them, have flour labels, right? So those are old flour sacks that they just tied around their waist. They're all skinny dudes, and they can kind of handle it. Anyway, super cool. That's from Fresno, California, one of my grandpa's old bakeries, Channel Bakery. Okay. Here's some of the trucks out front. He had 5 trucks going at least out front. And I don't think you can see it, but it's Channel Pies. This is a pie company, okay? You read on the front, your pies at your grocer, all right? And made with love and care, okay? Those were their taglines back then, okay? So there it is, my Gramps. He's standing out there with 5 of his trucks in Fresno. He had a bakery in Sacramento as well, cranking out pies for grocery stores, okay? So you can kind of see these numbers up above my head here that are always there. Those are from that old pie or that old bakery. They were cranking out like wedding cakes or birthday cakes, and they'd put numbers on top, right? And so those are all the old number cake pans hanging out up there. And for today's show, this Life of Pie, I'm actually using one of the old Channel Bakery pie pans. There, you can kind of see that, right? So that's a Channel pie pan, one of the few in existence still, okay? So anyway, as you can see, this has been a big part of my life. I mean, my father met my mom through the bakery when he was working there. And the bakery, it was always a part of the discussion around the house. There were all these legends around it that I would always hear. I came along much later, right? But as I grew up, hey, I get into the industry and I'm doing tons and tons of gigs, baking, pie related stuff, right? So I have always had this kinship with pies. It goes way, way back. I do get pie, as I said, when I wrote the promo for this one. I do get pie, and pie gets me. It's in my DNA, right? And so today's show, we're going to be laying down some basic pie dynamics. There's a ton of information in this one, right? And so we are going to get some talk about crusts, okay? First of all, I want to talk about different crusts. I want to talk about the ingredients, different mixing methods, and how to roll it all out, right? Of course, that's part of pies, right? We are going to have a little discussion on the foundations of fillings, okay? Different types of fillings. We're actually really looking at fruit fillings today. And the filling I'm going to make, I'm going to show you how to utilize cornstarch in the kitchen. That's a technique I wanted to throw into this one, because these classes or these shows or whatever you want to call these things, they're always about the technique. It's never about a big recipe or anything, okay? So all of this info about filling will be in this show. And then we're, of course, going to kind of construct this baby and talk about some baking, right? But for now, we are going to put it all together. I think you are watching this in the industry cooking community. If you are watching this, we got a couple of people out there. This is good stuff, okay? So yeah, industry cooking community, a lot of good folks out there sharing their food fantasies, okay? And what they're doing in the kitchen. It's kind of fun. It's kind of educational. You should check it out. And we always have these shows every Monday for the group, okay? Also, if you want to see some of the archives out there, there's industry cooking on YouTube. You can go out there and see classes on just class after class. Gosh, I don't know if I have 100 of them yet there, but I've got a bunch of them, okay? So go over there and hey, hack culinary school, because what I'm talking about is exactly what we talk about in culinary school. And that's what we're talking about today, okay? So I think that's it. I covered all the bases. That's it for preliminaries, okay? So let's do pie, okay? The first thing I want to talk about are the crusts, okay? We're going to get into crusts. There are 2 types of crust that we typically talk about in pies, okay? One of them is flaky. We all know about a flaky pie crust. Everybody talks about their grandma's flaky pie crust, right? And another one is mealy, and not so many people know about this, but we do a mealy crust when we have like a really wet filling. Like if I'm doing a custard pie, an example of a custard pie would be a pumpkin pie, right? That's custardy and liquid in the beginning, right? So I get a mealy pie dough, and it's going to handle that wet environment, if you will, much better than a flaky pie crust will, okay? So a lot of the times we'll see a mealy crust on the bottom of a pie and then a flaky crust on top, or sometimes we'll just see flaky, flaky, or mealy, mealy, or what have you. Oh, I just thought of another thing. Another place where you would see those mealy pie crusts is when you're getting into like savory cooking and you're seeing chefs making those patés wrapped in crust like that, okay? It's always good to use a mealy crust for those because they can handle the moisture that's produced when you're basically making meatloaf inside of a pastry crust, all right? So I just want to kind of throw this out there. We have a question line out there as we're moving forward. If anybody has questions, please shout them out, and we'll try and answer them for you around here, okay? Let's see. So we talked about flaky crust, we talked about mealy crust, and now I want to kind of talk about the basic ingredients in a crust, okay? So when you think about it, you know, I mentioned like grandma's pie crust, and everybody talks about, oh, their grandma makes the best pie crust. But when you think about it, pie crust is basically, it's 4 ingredients, and it's pretty basic, right? It's like flour, it's fat, you know, whether it's shortening or butter or something like that. It's water and maybe a pinch of salt, you know, and that's what most pie doughs are. My grandma makes the best pie dough. That's like saying my grandma makes the best roux, right? It's like flour and fat, basically. Super simple stuff is the bottom line. That's the moral of this story, right? And we're gonna show you how to put this together, okay? As we put this together, I want to remind or put the idea out there. Hey, Mr. Roberts out there watching, okay? I want to put this idea out there that we're talking about a short dough today, and we really want to avoid gluten development all day long today, okay? So we're not going to work this dough very much. It's going to be another one of those situations where it's like mix only until combined, right? And then we leave it alone and we do our thing and combine it and do whatever, you know, with your pie dough, whatever it is you people do with pie dough, okay? But we want to be mindful of gluten development, okay? Because this is a short dough, and the more we work that dough, the longer gluten chains we will have, if that makes sense, right? Okay. So when we're working with these doughs, as we're rolling them out, you don't want to sit there and fold them and re-roll them. If you have extra crust left over, you can kind of work them into maybe a bottom crust or something like that, but I probably wouldn't use them for a nice top crust, because if you start working one part of the crust more than another part as it cooks, it's not going to expand right, you know, and you're going to get all cattywampus. It'll be very funky. Okay. So usually if you're kind of using those under pieces, or I'm sorry, if you're using those extra pieces of crust, you want to work them into a bottom crust, okay? Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, all right? As we're working with these ingredients, again, it's flour and fat and water. We want the ingredients to be pretty cold, okay? You want to think about all of that butter. I'm going to show you the ratio here in a second here, but it's almost equal parts of flour and butter in a pie crust, basically. I keep saying butter, but it's fat. You could use a shortening or something. As you are mixing those two, you want to keep things very chill, because if that fat gets too hot, it's going to just start smashing out of the recipe. Things are going to start getting greasy, right? So you want to work your pie doughs fairly cold. I'll pull a little bit. In the hotels, you know, we used to make like 50 pounds of pie dough at once, you know, and then just keep it around, because we're knocking out pies all the time. We're knocking out like sheets of pie dough and things like that. So we would pull it out, work with just small amounts, pull out a little bit more from the refrigerator, work a small amount, and so on, right? So we want to keep things chilled from the beginning of this and to the end of it, okay? But I want to caution you, we don't want to get it too chilled to where the butter is too firm and we can't manipulate it with a rolling pin or anything like that. So temperature is kind of part of the art here. It's part of the technique and part of the feel of working with these doughs. But it's nothing to be intimidated about. It's like I said, fairly chill stuff, okay? Let's see. So we talked about that. Usually once we put a pie together, we'll use some egg wash over the top, right? So there are different washes you can use, though, I should mention. Sometimes we'll just butter, some folks will just butter wash the top and maybe throw a little sugar on there. That's very common on a pie. Some folks will put cream or buttermilk on the top of their pie or what have you, right, before they wash it. But probably most common is the egg. It gives you that brilliant shine, and we'll usually dilute that egg wash a little bit. You'll see see me do it later, right? We'll usually dilute that just a little bit with some water, okay? So it's just not this globby egg, okay? So that's basically the background on the ingredients. We talked about 2 different types of pie crust. Let's get into the scaling of this job today, okay? Now, I should say my recipes are educational recipes. They're not meant to, you know, for like entertaining or anything, but then you certainly could, okay? All of this stuff works, but it's just very, very basic. You can see I've got 4 ingredients here. Pastry flour. Pastry flour is what we call a soft flour. It's less gluten, more starch than say a bread flour, right? Which is more gluten and less starch. So we're going to be using 10 ounces of pastry flour or 250 grams here. We're going to be using 9 ounces of butter. And when we're talking about fats, I should say we have a choice of butter, we have a choice of shortening. And when we're talking about shortening, of course, we're talking about trans fats, not very healthy, but this was kind of the go-to back in the day for pie making because shortenings they'll create a superior flake in a dough, right? You can get really, really flaky pie dough because shortening, vegetable shortening, is kind of elastic and it'll stretch a little bit. So you'll get these huge crusts. But the only thing is that I don't want to eat a shortening crust. The melting temperature of shortening is higher than body temperature. So as you eat a shortening crust, I can always tell you get this coating of shortening in your mouth. I've talked about this before. We did a class on short dough's basic biscuitry, and we talked about this then too. Okay, shortening makes a great flake, but I don't want to eat it. Okay, it just coats your mouth with fat because it doesn't melt at your body temperature. So I usually use butter. When we are working with butter, if you have a shortening recipe and you're working with butter, you want to know that you want to increase that butter a little bit, the butter amount by about a quarter. So multiply your amount of butter by 1.25 is what I did here. I had a shortening recipe from back in the day, but we don't really use shortening much anymore, right? So I did butter, 9 ounces of butter here. It's almost a 1-to-1 ratio with that pastry flour, right? Or 220 grams, okay? We're looking at salt next. Salt, 1 teaspoon or 5 grams, and then water. We usually want chilled water. Remember I said we want to control temperature. So we'll get some cold water, and I need about 75 grams of that, okay, or 3 ounces. So those are the amounts. Again, what we're talking about today will work with any pie dough recipe. It'll work with your grandma's pie dough recipe. It ain't about the recipe. It's about the discussion behind the recipe, okay? How to work with these doughs and how to put them together, the temperature, as we were saying, okay? So let's move forward with this one. Whoop, whoop. Still making pies. The next thing we want to do, we talked about scaling. I've got my ingredients. Let me kind of show them to you. I've got my 10 ounces of flour or 250 grams. Can you guys see that? There it is. I've got my 75 grams of water. My salt, we want to dissolve the salt in water, and it's either, 5 grams or a teaspoon. I'm just gonna eyeball that, okay? So I just threw a teaspoon in there, and we wanna dissolve our salt in the water so it disperses in the recipe, all right? So that's a thing that bakers do. And then finally, I've kept the final ingredient cold. I'm gonna pull it on out now. I got my 9 ounces or 220 grams of butter, okay? Now, I'm just gonna make this one on the table. These things come together so quickly and easily. I'm gonna put my water off to the side, and what we're gonna look at next is called the cut-in method, okay? I do small amounts by hand typically, so that's what you're gonna see here. Get a cord out of the way, doing this TV studio thing. Okay, so what I want on hand is either a bench scraper, okay? Now, these are pretty firm, and if my butter's super cold, I'm probably gonna use this in the beginning, but I'll switch over to a bowl scraper, okay? And we've used these tools in other classes before, okay? And if you don't have one of these, by the way, I always recommend get a flexible one, get a Flexi, okay? But what I'm gonna do with these 2 ingredients is I'm gonna throw about half my flour down, and I'm gonna throw my butter down on top of it. More chunks. And I'm gonna dump the rest of my flour on there. I've still got the water and salt over here in a container. Oh, spring water or city water, it makes a difference in bread. Chlorine and fluoride in city water makes a difference in in bread. I could see that happening. We talk about making like a leavened bread. Chlorine, something like that, will affect like yeast bloom, yeast growth in their sourdough, right? They may not be able to. You know, I haven't had too many problems with it, but it is a thing that people talk about. But so far, I used to leave my water out and let the chlorine evaporate out of it and all of that. But now I have just been kind of going with it lately. It's been okay, but I'm in Washington now, and things might be different up here. We don't have fluoride, by the way, where I am. Anyway, back to the dough. Good question, Andy. Thank you. Awesome. So we're talking about the cut-in method. We talked about this again in another class called basic biscuitry. And what we are doing is literally cutting the fat into the flour. See how I threw flour on top and beneath? Every once in a while, I want to kind of toss things, because every time I cut a piece of butter, I've got open sections that are going to stick back together with other pieces of butter. I think I'll just get in here with my, my butter's a good temperature. I don't think I really need the heavy one, but it's not hurting. So I just keep going through. And the idea here is to cut up the fat in pieces about the size of a pea, and that'll give me a flaky dough. When we have a pea-sized piece of fat that is coated with flour, and then we roll that out, it's going to flatten, and that little flattened piece of flour-coated fat is going to become a flake in our pie dough. So we're looking for pea-sized pieces of butter in my flour. By the way, right now, there's no water in this recipe, so there's no gluten development. I can't overwork this at this point. We could get, you know, there is a tiny bit of water in the butter, but for the most part, it's bound up in the butter. And we're not activating gluten here. So we can be a little aggressive with this, and we can keep on mixing. But once we add the water to this, gluten will be activated, and we do not want to work it very much at all. Again, you're looking at the cut-in method. We use this for short doughs like biscuits, flaky doughs, tart doughs, pie doughs. And you've probably seen your grandma doing similar things. There's a tool that we use for this called a pastry cutter. That's kind of like this, but it has multiple blades. I did not pull that one out today. Sometimes you can pick them up, kind of rub it with your hands. But if you're like me, you got warm hands, you're kind of melting butter when you do that. And it's good to get in there and feel things, eh? You guys get the idea. Still talking about the cut-in method. Biscuits and pie dough right here. And it's universal. You walk into a strange kitchen, they got a recipe for biscuits and pie dough. You remember the cut-in method. And you can just put it right together. You don't have to look at the technique anymore, because this is basic stuff. None of this is rocket science. Some people call this the rub-in method. See how I'm kind of rubbing the fat and flour in. Making flakes. Making flakes. So, yeah, good one, Robert. Robert's talking about using a grater for the butter for this. I actually did that in the biscuit class that I did. Basic biscuitry. Good one. I'll tell you, I don't know why I didn't pull out my little pastry blender. But we're about there. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make one flaky crust in the interest of brevity for these classes. Sometimes they get a little bit long. Okay. I was thinking about, maybe I should do a mealy crust underneath and then a flaky crust on top. But I think I'm just going to do one overall. Okay. So now that I've got things kind of blended and I've got some nice chunky pieces of flour in there, they're looking pretty good. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and add my salt and water. Let me swirl that around. Salt looks dissolved and your water should be cold here. Cold water. And I'm going to draw it on in. Oh, buddy. There we go. And just barely work it. I'm going to bring my scraper into it. And it's coming together. A little dry-ish. Kind of need to let the water kind of soak into the flour a little bit. Kind of bring things together. But again, how easy is that, right? You just cut the flour and fat together. And if you have a mixer by gum, you could throw it in a mixer and get all of that together that way as well. Okay, I really haven't done much to it. Now I'm going to kind of give it a little turn, work it a little more. Try and pull this all together. I don't think I need to add any more liquid to it. I was wondering if I did. It looked a little dry, but that is about it. Notice I'm just kind of turning it over and just kind of pressing on it. I'm really not manipulating things. I'm trying not to stretch dough. I don't want to knead it or anything. I just want to kind of work the moisture and fat and flour together. And it's pretty much coming together. So what I'm going to do is cut this in half and make 2 discs out of this. And we're going to be working with this a little later. A little wet right there. So I'll have a top crust and a bottom crust. You can see I barely folded this together. And this needs to rest a little bit. The water and flour kind of need to get used to the idea of living together, okay? So that flour is going to keep soaking up water. And also, if we did activate gluten in that little escapade just then, it's going to have a little chance to relax that gluten. Any butter that feels like it's getting warm right now, it's going to have a chance to relax and firm up a little bit. The butter's not going to relax. It's going to firm up. It's going to tense up. What am I saying, right? So again, what I'm doing is I'm flattening these out into a disc. So I'm just going to pick these 2 up and put them on a plate. They're not perfect circles, but I really don't want to overwork them at this point. You can kind of see little bits of fat in those pieces of dough. And again, those are going to be the flakes in our dough, in our pie dough, once we roll it out. All right, I got to find a place to set it. And we're going to let that, again, we're going to let that butter firm up. We're going to let that gluten relax. We're going to let that flour hydrate, and we're going to put together a filling. I want to kind of talk about that stuff, okay? So that was kind of the first part of dough mixing and scaling, okay? Now we're going to talk about some fillings. When we're talking about fruit fillings, we usually look at thickeners, okay? A lot of our fruit fillings are thickened fruit. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of juice in your pie. I'm going to kind of clean up while I talk. So some of the thickeners that you'll see out there, you know, when grandma makes a pie, she'll just, you know, mix a little sugar and flour together, maybe a little cinnamon, and then toss her apples in that. And so they've got a little flour in there, and you cook that pie, and that flour will thicken up any juices that come out of the apples and berries and whatever it is that you're cooking, and voila, you've got a thickened pie filling. And this works pretty good. The only thing is you know, it doesn't look like that restaurant style. You know, it doesn't have that clear look to it that you see in like so many pie fillings, right? It's kind of opaque looking when you're using flour for that. Let me get rid of this real quick. So let's do a quick little scene change, and we are going to start making a fruit filling while those crusts kind of relax in the fridge. Okay, right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is kind of show you what I have here. At this point, I'm going off a recipe reservation, okay? I just bought some apple juice. Again, I just wanted to show you how to use a cornstarch slurry in the kitchen. And so what we'll need first is a liquid to heat up. I used to do this demo with just water in culinary school, just to show them how to work with this stuff, right? So any liquid in a pot, I've got about a cup and a quarter. I'm making more than I need here, but I got about a cup and a quarter of apple juice that I purchased today, okay? Just regular old apple juice. And I'm gonna put that on the fire. Step one is to bring your liquid to the boil here. Again, we're making a thickened liquid here and then using it to kind of glaze our fruit that's going inside the pie filling, okay? So as that heats up, the next thing that I'm gonna add in there is a little bit more apple juice, okay? I held off about, I don't know, 3 ounces of apple juice here, and I'm gonna just mix it with a little bit of cornstarch, okay? So the method for making corn or using cornstarch in the kitchen is to have some cold liquid, add the cornstarch to the cold liquid and just stir it in. And then we'll talk about how to kind of add it into a sauce, okay? So I just added cornstarch in with about 3 ounces of apple juice, and it's gonna blend together pretty easily, but it wants to separate. You'll see it go down to the bottom. I don't know if anybody's ever played with cornstarch as a kid. You know, you get it wet, you can kind of squeeze it in your hand and let it go, and it just slackens up, and it's fun stuff. Now, right now, I stopped stirring, and that cornstarch goes to the bottom. Hey, I'm okay with that. We don't need to worry about that. Another thing that I have here is just some cinnamon sugar, okay? There's nothing going on in this other than cinnamon and sugar. And so I'm just gonna kind of blend that up. I added a little more sugar to it. And I'll just say, I don't have a recipe here because when I worked bake shops, we would just make cinnamon sugar. I used it all the time. I did breakfast bakeries and I'm just throwing down cinnamon sugar all the time. It's just something I kept a bucket of it around and I'd make it all the time. And I'd use about half bucket a day, you know? So cinnamon sugar, no ratio or anything. I just look at kind of a nice amber color that I want, okay? It's got some cinnamon in there. We're still bringing this up to heat. We're waiting for that apple juice to come to temperature. So while that's happening, I think I'll peel a couple of apples. We're going to use some apples today. We're going to use some berries. I'm using these berries because I got berry bushes out front. I've got strawberries out there. I've got blueberry bushes out there, and there are berries growing all over the neighborhood. And so I'm using some of the wild berries that I picked around the neighborhood. I'm going to turn down my liquid right now and kind of look at the fruit while we kind of set this aside. I want to have that fruit ready when we put this together, but you guys know what's coming. We're going to be using a cornstarch slurry to thicken up a liquid here, some apple juice in this case, okay? All kitchen applications with cornstarch pretty much look like this, okay? So let's go ahead and break down some apples, and we're going to use them for our filling. As I work with the apples, I'm going to kind of show you how we peel fruit in the kitchen here, okay? When we're doing fruit, oftentimes we lop off the top and the bottom, and then we just peel the sides and go around like, you know, we're going around the planet, okay? And so that's what you're going to see me do with this. I peel watermelon the same way I peel an apple, the same way I peel citrus. We'll peel oranges like this. It looks like so, okay? So I'll go through my fruit. This has all been cleaned. Took all the stickers off. If I ever meet the guy that invented those stickers, he's got some explaining to do. They added a step to every job in the kitchen. So I get rid of the top and the bottom. I'll get all my fruit topped so it doesn't roll around anymore, and I make sure it's all clean, okay? And then I go through, and if it's something big, I'll grab a big slicing knife like a watermelon or a cantaloupe or whatever, and I'll go down the sides like this, turning it as I go, and I'll just take strips off all the way around, and then I've got these smooth sides. When I'm doing an apple, I do it with a paring knife, okay? And so I'm putting the base of my thumb on the bottom of that apple and going around, just pulling off enough peel to do the job. A little bit of brown right there, no big deal. By the way, these are Honey Crisp apples, just what I had around. I didn't do that, you know, different apples for different textures in there. And now I'm going around again. I'm turning the apple and I can see the side that I'm cutting as I turn. I do a lot of my peeling like this in the kitchen, okay? We teach tournée in culinary school, so students are able to do that, okay? Tournée is a knife cut, the most hated, dreaded knife cut there is in culinary school. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of those peels. Feed those to my chickens. And then I'm gonna go through and dice up the apples at this point. So I'm going to quarter them. I don't have an apple corer. I think most people may not have one of those. So I quarter them, and then I just take a corner out of that, and they're seed free, okay? So I can go through and do all of those. Then I got clean apples, and I'm just gonna dice them up real quick. In fact, I think I'll do that right now. I'll dice as I go. So I figured, 2 apples, it won't take me long to do in front of you guys. And I'm not making them super big. 2 across the top. What is that, about 3 across the bottom? Get rid of this piece. This isn't taking long. We're zooming. This is not really a knife skills class. And you can just see me kind of zooming through this. I have knife skills classes. You go over to YouTube, Industry Cooking on YouTube, and you can see a couple of knife skills classes I've done. I break down a chicken in a few of them. Heck, I break down a goat in one of my classes. You want to talk knife skills? Okay, so I'm just going to grab all my apple chunks, toss them in here. I'm going to, this is my industry standard whenever I'm making apple filling. I'm just going to toss in a little cinnamon sugar, just enough to coat, however much I want. That was probably a 1/4 cup, okay? I'm going to add a little bit of lemon, not a ton. And this lemon keeps it from going brown, I guess, but I also like the interplay of lemon and vanilla together, okay? I'm going to add vanilla to this, and whenever I'm doing vanilla, heck, a lot of the time, especially when I got berries going on, I'm always throwing a little lemon in there. So that's what the lemon's about in here. It is actually a flavor thing. And I did about a 1/2 lemon in there. Oh yeah, we got lots of people out there hanging out. Okay, so right now I've got apple, cinnamon sugar, and a little bit of lemon in there. I'm going to bust a couple of drops of vanilla on there, and that's my basic apple pie filling, okay? I keep it super simple in these classes. That's 4 ingredients in there, and I didn't measure it. And I just put in about a teaspoon of that vanilla in there, give it a toss, and that's my apple filling right there, okay? As I said, the grandma style of apple pie, you could have mixed in a little bit of flour in with that sugar and coated the apples with a little bit of flour here too. But I wanted to work with the cornstarch again. So apples are ready to go. I also wanted to show you my berries, okay? What I'm doing today, I'm calling it a berry bottom pie. This whole class came about because I needed to use up some berries. I got berries coming out of my ears right now. And so it's got some strawberries. I didn't use as many strawberries as I would like because a baked strawberry pie is really not much of a thing. Usually strawberry pies are fresh. You'll pre-cook the liquid like we're gonna do right now and then pour it over fresh strawberries and not bake it. But this is gonna be a baked pie. I threw a little bit of strawberry in there along with a bunch of blueberries. This one right here is the only one I grew, okay? My blueberries are coming soon, but that's the only one I actually grew. The rest of them are just Washington State berries. And then over here on the side, these are salmon berries, and they grow all over my neighborhood up here in Gig Harbor, Washington, okay? So I've got several of those. And hey, we're gonna toss them in the same with a little bit of lemon, a little vanilla, a little cinnamon sugar. I wanted to keep these separate. I wanted to keep them separate because I don't want the berries on the apple so much. I want kind of a separation. So as I said, I'm calling this berry bottom pie. I'm going to put the berries on the bottom and put the apples on top and kind of let the berries cook up into the apples a little bit. But for the most part, most of that color will be on the bottom. I love this foraging up here. You can just walk all over the place and pick berries everywhere you go. That's a beautiful mix. Look at those salmon berries in there. They look like golden raspberries. I'll be honest, they don't have a big flavor punch, you know. If you pick them on a rainy day or a day after a rainy day, they're really not much flavor to these guys, right? But they're not so bad, and they'll add a little tartness, and there's some nutrients in there. And heck, I foraged it. It's awesome. I love that. Okay, so I have 2 fillings that are going to be going in our pie. I am going to make my apple juice now. Okay, so for the apple juice, I said we had some apple on the fire, apple J, and it had just gotten to the boil. I've got some cinnamon sugar here, maybe another little drop of vanilla. I think I forgot vanilla on the berries, by the way. Let me go do that real quick. About a half teaspoon on those guys to kind of play around with that cinnamon sugar. Okay, so right now we're talking about mixing a cornstarch slurry into a liquid. As we do this, we want to get it up to the boil because it needs to boil later. But as I'm adding this slurry, I'm not gonna have the water boiling. So I wanna get it there and then we're gonna turn it off. We are super close. Okay, so my apple juice is starting to boil. Okay, you can kind of see it jiggling around the corners. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to turn it on to low. Okay, you can turn it off, but I'm going to turn it to low. And then I've got apple juice and cornstarch here. That cornstarch settles down to the bottom, and so you want to give this a stir and stir the cornstarch back into it. And then I'm going to let go with about 2/3 of this, and we're going to see what it looks like. Okay, 2/3, and you can see that. Let me get this down here. You can see that I'm stirring it as it hits the water here, and it instantly started thickening. Okay, it just already looks like, well, let me get this around here, already kind of looks thick around the edges there. It's already kind of thicker than I wanted, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't add all of that in there. Now, this is not as thick as it's going to be because there's one more step I need to do here. Whenever we're thickening anything with a starch, we need to bring it all the way to the boil. This is crucial right here. So you can see it's pretty cloudy right now. I'm going to bring it all the way to the boil and let it boil for a minute, and it's going to start getting a little more clear for you. Like you're used to seeing, like teriyaki sauce has that clarity to it. And, you know, canned pie filling has that clarity to it. It's the refined starches you see, okay? It's kind of getting that weird opaque look to it. And I don't think I've got, you know, probably a few ounces of cornstarch here that I held back. And that's kind of how I roll with cornstarch. I don't quite commit to all of it at once. Okay, so it's been boiling a little bit and it's about done, okay? All I need is a good like minute or so of a good boil. And this is true with any starch thickened liquid. Once you boil it for about a minute, that's about as thick as it's going to get for you. Okay, I mean, it'll get a little thicker, but you're kind of there once you hit the boil. That's an important thing in making sauce making. In sauce making, and that is what we're doing right now is sauce making. Okay, we just made some apple sauce, if you will. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit of this cinnamon sugar into here. And maybe a drop more of that vanilla. Okay, I don't want to add the vanilla in early. It'll kind of evaporate away. Oh dear, I spilled a little. Bad chef, bad chef. I got a question over here. Let me stir these two together while I read it. Can you count on the cooking of the pie to bring it to a boil? If it boils more than once, is it okay? Yeah, you know, most of the time, I will be honest, you know, most of the time I will do that technique where you're just adding like flour or cornstarch in with the sugar that you toss on the apples and kind of let the heat of the pie hit the boil. This stuff is boiling at a higher temperature than just water. If you think about it, it's got sugar diluted in it. It's going to take more heat to bring it to the boil, right? So it definitely gels up. I really am doing this method today to kind of just show people who have never seen cornstarch before how to put it into a liquid, okay? Let's review that, okay? We bring the initial liquid that we're trying to thicken to a boil, we turn it off, we mix cornstarch and cold liquid together. We drop about 2/3 of it in and then stir it. I always hold some back just in case, right? You stir it and you bring it up to the full boil. Remember to stir it as it's going in and don't drop it into boiling water. It'll turn into noodles as soon as it hits that boiling water, right? Bring it up to a boil for a good minute, maybe two, and you got yourself a sauce. And by the way, if you continue to keep cooking this cornstarch for too long, you're going to actually burst the cornstarch molecules. They won't be able to hold water. It's like breaking balloons, right? And so there it is. I've got kind of a thick, it's actually more saucy, you know. I could probably add a little more cornstarch to this. Let's do it. I think I will make it a little thicker. And the reason is I'm thinking about these berries I'm throwing in, especially strawberries. They're going to be kicking out the liquid, okay? So I want to add a little more. We're not at the boil yet, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit more. I still held some back. I'm stirring it in, and it's got a flame underneath. Gosh, I should show you that. It's got a flame underneath. And again, it's like opaque right now. It looks creamy, and then it'll start looking more clear. See how it's starting to turn honey colored almost? Isn't that cool? You don't know how thick it's going to be until you hit that full boil. You're not done until this boils for a minute. See how that changed? I think that's cool. That's some food science right there. I'm going to turn this off. I got cinnamon sugar in there. I got a little vanilla. I didn't really measure stuff. You know, I just kind of threw it together to kind of demonstrate using a cornstarch slurry in a kitchen. Okay. I think that made sense, right? So let's go ahead and utilize this. In just a minute, I'm going to give it a chance to cool. What I'm going to do now is start rolling out our pie dough. Okay, so let's do another scene change. We're doing the rest of it over on that side of the kitchen. So I saw the cornstarch question. How much cornstarch did I add? I did 50 grams, or close to 2 ounces, or I'm sorry, yeah, 2 ounces of cornstarch with that water. So 50 grams in with that. Actually, I used apple juice. And again, it was probably about 3 ounces of apple juice, okay? Okay, hopefully that helped. All right, that's the last question I saw. Let's get out this pie dough and we're gonna start rolling. I'm gonna pull out a little bit of pastry flour to work with this. I don't wanna work too much more flour into the dough. My fruit is over here just kind of macerating in a little bit of vanilla, lemon juice, and cinnamon sugar, just a little. And I'm breaking out the gear. So let me bring it on down here. Get these lines out of the way. Checking power. I think we're looking good. And I'm just pulling, kind of flouring up the table. And then I'm going to shove most of that flour off to the side. And I'm just going to pull one of those dough rounds out. And the first thing we're going to do is line my family's channel bakery pie tin. Okay. So there it is. We're not prepping that pie tin other than to have it very, very dry. Usually in the bakeries, we would wash those pans and then put them back in the oven to dry them so they didn't get rusty. And that's what I'll be doing today. So I'm going to put the rest of this back. We're rolling our bottom crust here, okay? I want to get plenty of flour on there, but again, I want to kind of be careful not to work too much in. Now, I was rolling out dough for pizza last week. I want to remind people as we were rolling dough that I need that dough to float on the table, to float on this. It shouldn't be sticking to the table, okay? And if it is, toss some more flour under there. I've kind of floured up my dough ball. I've kind of shaped it in a circle. I don't want to handle it too much. And I'm going to kind of flour the wheel. Okay, can you count? I think we got that question. And I'm just going to be kind of gentle. This one's still soft. Usually I would have let this rest for about an hour. I shape it into an oval and then I turn it and then round out my oval, okay? But first, I've got some weird edges. I'm going to kind of crunch them together a little. Now I'm going to turn it and I'm going to go in this direction. Yeah, I wish it was a little cooler. I'll tell you that. And I want to make sure that it's moving so it feels like it's kind of sticking, right? And so I want to keep kind of a scraper around or a spatula, whatever you have, and make sure that I've got some flour under there. So I'm going to drag it back over here, get a little more flour so it's moving, get a little more on top, and then I'm going to roll it out this way. And every once in a while, I can bring my pan over and say, oh, it's a little bigger than that pan. That's looking pretty okay, right? But we're not quite there on the other direction. So let's make sure that it's floating again. You can see me kind of picking this up. And this, again, is a fairly soft one. It's making me a little nervous. And now I'll go out this direction. Maybe a little more this way. And now I'm just kind of evening things out. And it needs to go ahead and go in the pan now. I'll go ahead and lay down the pan and you can see it's kind of hanging off all the way around. Maybe a little, well, we're looking pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with where we are right now. So at this point, I like to brush it off. Forgot to grab my little brush here. And then I'm going to go ahead and just fold it over my rolling pin. And I've got quite a lot of flour underneath. So I want to get some of that off as well. And I don't know if you can see that, but I got a lot of flour on there, right? And now that I've picked it up, you can see the pin is kind of holding that the weight of the dough. I'm going to bring my pan on over and just kind of fold it into the pan. And there she is. It fit beautifully. I can see, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I can see flakes of fat in that dough. I'm very, very happy. Now we're doing a filled pie today. If you were going to do like a pre-baked pie, you would poke holes in this thing. You might put some paper down and put some sort of pie weight in there and bake this until it's golden brown inside. And that is your pie. But for now, I'm going to set this aside. He's pretty soft. He's really making me nervous, I got to say. I'm going to chill this guy, I think. He needs to chill out while I finish these guys off. Let me clean up a little bit. I'm just going to shove the flour over here. We're going to need that flour again when we roll out our top crust. Ideally, as I said, you probably want to let that rest an hour and let that butter firm up a little bit. So I can set these bowls down and we're good. So I've got my two fillings here and I'm just going to split, or really probably not even use all of this, but I'm just going to add a little bit of this glaze on here. It's apple based and it's an apple pie. Seems to kind of work, eh? Now these apple pieces are going to get lightly cooked with this hot goo going over them. Let's just call it goo. Call it what it is. But most of the cooking is going to happen in the oven. And there will be moisture vented off in the pie as it bakes. And there will be more thickening occurring as liquids kind of blend together into the mass, okay? Again, we could have done this pie filling in a lot of different ways. I chose this way today just to demonstrate cornstarch slurry to you guys. Gramps was probably using things like flour to thicken the pies back in the day, by the way. Those refined starches, like cornstarch, you probably started seeing them in the 20s, or I'm sorry, yeah, maybe late 20s, early 30s. By the way, the picture you guys saw was from 1931, height of the Depression. That's why all those guys looked a little skinny, I'm thinking. So now I've got pie filling. That looks like canned pie filling, basically. It's got that clear look to it. That's what we're talking about, okay? I can go ahead and put this on in the pies now. Again, I'm doing a berry bottom pie, so the berries are going in first. I'm laying them on in there. Again, I'm not really doing I'm not punching holes in this crust, docking it, in other words. This is going to be a juicy bottom. And so we don't want any excuses for leakage, if you will, okay? So I think about a third of our filling is going to be berry here. And let me get the rest of that goodness out of there. So now I top it with apple, hence the name, berry bottom, right? Super simple ingredients here. There were 4 ingredients in the dough. There were 4 ingredients in the filling. And there it is. It's a pretty good amount. Those were beautiful apples, by the way. Just beautiful apples up here in Washington. Okay. Probably have enough goo in there. I don't need any more. I think I'll leave that out of it. I'm going to set this aside. So we're going to roll out our top crust, get this guy done, and then start getting in the oven. That'll be the show. What time? Yeah, we're about, our shows are always about the same amount of time here. Let's see, is that a 9-inch or a 10? That is a 9. That is a 9-inch pan. Thanks for asking. This piece of dough feels a little firmer, but that might just be the outside. Yeah, it's feeling good. Okay, again, you guys are going to see me throw down some flour here. Kick that off to the side a little bit. And a little flour on top. I might need to get a little more flour. Smashing it down. Now, if this is like rock hard, pastry chefs will sit there and smack their dough like this to get it smoothed out or flattened out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and roll. You can see it's kind of cracking. I like to fix that stuff early. I still got my brush over here. Get some of that flour off of there. Crunch that stuff together. Hit it again. It's not really floating, so I'm going to loosen it on the table with my scraper. Get some flour under it so it floats. I'm going the other direction. I've got it into an oval, pick it up, maybe flip it over from time to time. Ensure that it's going to float. And practice with the feel of this. Now I'm getting, it's sticking a little bit, so it got a little irregular there. The shape of it kind of got irregular right here because it was sticking right there. Get a little more of flour. Oh, right here. That'll do it. Just enough. And hey, I'll flip it again. It's good to kind of just practice with the feel of your dough. Flip it around from time to time. Show it who the boss is. I will say my lovely trophy wife, she seems to be afraid of dough, of pie dough especially. She has told me this. I think my dough's looking great, okay? It's plenty big enough, okay? I'm just gonna clean up this flour around here a little bit. Brush off the excess. I want a clean top. And we're gonna do that same trick with the rolling pin. We're gonna fold it right over the top of it. Oop. I'm gonna lift it on up, bring this on over. Oh, my buddy, it broke a little bit as I was moving. I'm just going to add a little bit of dough right here. Just that little corner right there. Bummer. Okay, so at this point, if you have a lot of dough hanging off, you might go around and trim some of it. I use kitchen shears for this usually. But I want some dough around the edge, okay? I'm leaving maybe about, oh gosh, maybe a ½ inch or so hanging off the edge. I'm just cutting off the really long pieces over here. All right, almost there. So yeah, I've left some dough hanging off most of the way around. There's a glob right there and we're done. Okay. I could do a little something else with these little crusts out here, but there's not a lot of waste here, as you can see, not a ton. So at this point, I want to take my crust. Some chefs will roll it under. I like to roll mine up. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way around and kind of roll this together and just make kind of a large band of dough around the outer edge. So this isn't really the crimping. I'm just kind of building up a little wall of goodness here. Kind of rolling it in, kind of trying to smooth it as I go. I'm at the part where it kind of tore. We're still looking good. And so I've got a pretty heavy crust around the outer edge. I'm almost all the way around. And I've rolled the outside up and over, all the way around. So now I've got kind of a little crust. And I might just build up a little more dough over here where I had that break. I can feel our butter's getting a little warm here. My kitchen's super hot. I know yours is too. And now I'm going to try and bring it on home here. We're going to make our crimping, okay? And so we'll do a little decorative pattern. It's 2 fingers, thumb and forefinger, and another finger on the inside. So I push in on the outside with 2 fingers, push out on the inside with 1 finger, and I'm going all the way around town. I can go this way too, so I don't have to move the pie as much. That one kind of didn't stick. That's where I had my little accident. My fingers got a little sticky there. I'm hitting them with a little flour. So again, I don't know how well you can see this, but I'm pushing in with the 2 fingers and pushing out with 1. Pushing in with 2, out with 1. It's sticking a little bit. Get a little flour on your finger. Coming around, we're almost finished. This guy's going in the oven and then I'll just be pulling it out later on. I'll do just a little quickie Facebook Live and pull it on out, okay? So the last thing I want to do, well, there's 2 more things I want to do. Get rid of some of this stuff here. Let me do a little scene maintenance here. Get that off the screen. I need to brush it. So we're going to do a quick little egg wash on this. And I want this smooth. I don't want any little pieces of egg white streaming through, anything like that. I'm just getting a little coating of egg wash on here. I'm getting on the inside of that crimp right now. And no puddles in there, no egg puddles. Egg puddles are gross. Going over the top. Again, we're egg washing with egg this time. Out in the industry, I was playing with like a spray bottle, diluting egg that I had strained. I would dilute it with water, put it in a spray bottle, and spray a coating on things. It helped with making croissants, I'll tell you, in the morning. Save me some time. Okay. And along the top, we are almost done with the egg washing. So as I did that, I just kind of pulled all of my little scores. So now they're kind of in like a sunshine pattern. That's kind of cool. I like that. Once I've got it egg washed, that's where my friend the cinnamon sugar comes in again. And I'm just going to top that with a little cinnamon sugar. Some chefs don't like the cinnamon on the outside. I put cinnamon on everything. I love it. I don't need tons of this because it will melt and turn into syrup and just destroy your oven, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna chill this actually, just to let this firm up before I put it in the oven. So let me just kind of do that, and then we will talk about our little escapade today. This thing is way too warm to just throw into the oven. And the last thing that Gina brought up, thank you so much, girl. I almost didn't do that in front of the group, is the venting, okay? Now, you guys have all seen pies vented. They make the holes in the top until today, right? Until I got here. Why do we do that? We have to let steam escape. That's another reason why we get this gooey inside that kind of seems like a medium rare pie, right? And so what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna cut simple vents in this thing. We're just doing a very simple pie today, nothing fancy, but I want several of them, okay? So I'm gonna do probably about 5. I'm running into an apple. There we go. So there's an opening, 5 around the top, and we'll see how many I get around the bottom. But I need to open that up, and then I'm going to cut several about midway down to vent that dough. I really wish this dough was a little cooler, like I said. Usually about an hour or so of resting time, and it's firmed up. It's the butter, you see. So I did several cuts into that pie, okay? I did about 10 around the outside. So that really needs to firm up before I do anything with it. So what we're gonna get into next is the baking, as you shall see. We want a fairly hot oven. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that on right now. So I'm gonna be setting my oven at 400 degrees. Maybe 405. I'm still not real sure about my oven here, and so I'm still experimenting with it. Push start. There we go. So it's turning on. Now, one of the things about pies is getting that bottom crust cooked. Most people, you taste pie, you know what I'm talking about. It's always like half cooked underneath. It's like medium rare pie, okay? If you can get a bottom crust that's cooked, that is the accomplishment in the kitchen, okay? And so the way we do that is we usually cook pies on a deck oven, okay? They're sitting right on stone, and so that bottom really gets cooked. I used a little pizza stone last week for pizza. I'm using the same thing in my oven today. So if you've got any kind of a little stone or something that you can use, please do utilize that, and that is going to help you get that bottom crust cooked off. There are other tricks to this, like using a black pan, it'll absorb the heat better and things like that, right? Using the bottom of the oven, you'll see if I pull open my oven, you'll see that it's actually down on the bottom. Okay, that's all about baking that crust on the bottom. Okay, it's easy to bake the top crust, tough to bake the bottom crust. I just pulled the pie out of the oven. It's looking beautiful. There it is. We went at 405 degrees. I went 405 for probably about 45 minutes on this guy. Okay, I had them on a baking stone, so the bottom is most likely
kind of cooked. Okay, I'm not going to have a nice a medium rare pie, right? And so that's kind of what we're looking at. It came out beautifully. I'm very, very happy. Not a lot of seepage up top from the juices or anything. It's a pretty clean pie. By the way, before I threw it in there, I chilled it for another half hour or so before it went in, and I actually put it in the freezer. So the dough was firmed up before it went in. Things came out great. I'm pretty happy with it. And so there it is. Just coming out of the oven, you don't want to cut into this thing. You want to wait for maybe a half hour. Let it cool before you cut into this thing. It's like a lasagna. You can't just cut into this thing. It'll just fall apart, right? So let it sit, let it set up, and it's going to be a great pie. And there it is, guys.
Basically, what did we cover today? We looked at crust, we looked at the ingredients, flour, butter, water, salt. We talked about mixing methods. You want to work cold with that stuff. You saw my butter was heating up in this very hot kitchen today. It's like 85 degrees in Washington. You saw my stuff heating up today, right? Temperature is very, very important. You also don't want it so cold that the butter won't roll out either. You want to find kind of a nice happy medium to work with. Okay. You want to mix that crust very, very minimally. You want to mix minimally so we don't get gluten development, and you want to rest it before working. Okay. Now we did the filling. We covered the cooked juice method where I just cooked the juice and thickened it and then poured it over the fruit. Okay. It's a different way of doing it. Most of the time you see like, the sugar, the flour, and the cinnamon or whatever spices are tossed together. That's tossed onto the fruit, and then that's the thickening agent. Okay. But I wanted to show you guys a cornstarch slurry in the kitchen. Okay. When we use that cornstarch slurry, by the way, we brought a liquid all the way up to a boil. We added cornstarch to a cold liquid, and then we whisked the cold cornstarch slurry, is what we call that. We mix that slurry into the hot liquid, okay? Then we bring it to a boil, let it cook for about a minute, and then it's done. That's all you gotta be, that's about all you gotta do, okay? We talked about pidodynamics. We rolled and built a simple berry bottom pie with ingredients that I kind of scrounged around the property and that I had around the kitchen, okay? We talked about temperature and mindfulness of gluten and all of that stuff. And then we talked about baking tips, right? Time and temperature, high heat, bake the bottom. Okay, so let's see. I hope you're kind of enjoying these culinary school hacks, right? I mean, you're not having to sit in a classroom or anything. I do this like once a week, and I'm basically just rolling through my old culinary lectures. That's kind of what we're looking at. It's not about recipes. It's like techniques and ingredients and ratios, and sound kitchen judgment, right? Make sure that you roll over to my little Facebook page, okay? Industry cooking community. Join up with those great people over there, throwing down their food adventures and their learning experiences, and you'll see chefs over there throwing their plates down, and educators. There's a good group of people over there, so you should check it on out. Also, check out the YouTube channel over on YouTube, the Industry Cooking channel, and you can see tons and tons of videos. I have tons of these shows, okay? So please check that out, and if you get over there, please subscribe and tell your friends to subscribe as well, okay? For now, that's basically the show. It's been a good one, as usual, I think, okay? And I just enjoy these things so much. I'm laying down what I think is survival techniques, right? People need to cook, and I see so many adults that just can't cook their way out of a paper bag, and that is why I do this, okay? So that was Life of Pie, people. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget that the party is always in the kitchen. Ladies and gentlemen, class is dismissed.